Good morning, everyone. My name is Cindy Stewart. I am the operations manager for Cadre. Today, you are here to learn about the incident command system and the public informations officer. Welcome to our session. If you would please put your name and your agency in the chat, that would be helpful to us all. We're going to start off by letting our team introduce ourselves, and then I'll do a couple of introductory slides, and then I'll turn it over to our main speaker, Lynn Brown, and I'll start off with you, Lynn. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Lynn Brown. I'm a recovering emergency manager. I was the emergency manager for the city of Sunnyvale for several years, then moved over to the city of Mountain View. I was also the public information officer for Mountain View for several years, so that's my experience.
Jen?
Well, hi, good morning, everybody. So happy to meet everybody virtually. My name's Jennifer, and I work for the City of Morgan Hill as their Office of Emergency Services Coordinator for about 18 years. And I'm also a partner with Cadre. So today I've got my Cadre hat on. Nice to meet everyone.
Savannah?
Hey everyone, I'm Savannah. I work with Cadre, and I am not a recovering emergency manager, but I am the communications manager here. So it's nice to meet everyone.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We are going to talk just a little bit about who Cadre is. Cadre started off as after the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake as a response agency for gathering all the nonprofits to assist in the recovery of the Loma Prieta earthquake. It just became an official 501c3 nonprofit at the end of 2019. And at that time, if you remember right, early 2020, we had COVID. So we kicked right into COVID as soon as we became a nonprofit. Cadre, since then, becoming a nonprofit, has been the executive director of Cadre is Marsha Hubby. She is also a retired, not even recovering emergency manager. Most of us are not recovering. We pretend we are, but we're not. She is not a recovering member of the emergency management field. And she and myself and Lynn Brown started kind of bringing Cadre together in more than just a training and exercise kind of way. Today, our vision is that we can strengthen the coordination of non-government agencies to help with disasters, to help themselves, as well as to help each other and then potentially help the community. On Blue Sky Days, we still do trainings like this. We also assist community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, private sector, individuals as well. And we've got a fairly new program going that I'll talk about in just a second. So our Cadre website, I just wanted to kind of point this out quickly to let you know that there's a plethora of information on the Cadre website. The picture that you see there is the front of the website, but below, if you scroll down, there's a place for events and for notifications. And if there is a disaster happening and Cadre is activated in any way, there will be information there to talk to you all about when we would be hosting coordination meetings, most likely if the software is available via Zoom. There is also, that's also where you can get our latest newsletter. Across the top, you'll see just above the Red Cross building, there is a link that says CSNs, which stands for Community Support Networks. Cadre just started a program for community support networks. And what we've done is we have brought together like-minded experts in the non-government arena to talk about issue-based topics like food, shelter, transportation, those kind of topics, and to help each other be more resilient. And then as a group, we always are better prepared to help the community to recover. So these networks are currently going through a series of kickoff meetings. You may have seen some of the invitations to those kickoff meetings if you've ever participated with Cadre before, and you're on our mailing list. This is a list of all of the networks. As you can see, there are 20 of them. They range from access and functional needs to things like faith and spiritual care, food, immigrant support, mass care, seniors, transportation, unhoused, volunteers, and youth. We are trying to bring all of these groups together individually, and then we'll be, kind of working together in smaller groups of support networks. So maybe we'll be bringing a transportation one together with an unhoused one and the climate one to talk about how do we help the unhoused get to warming centers or cooling centers during an extreme weather event. That's one of the possibilities. We also have another program going on currently. We received funding from AmeriCorps, their RSVP program, which is retired and senior volunteers. And our goal is to engage 1,000 senior volunteers, 55 and older. I don't feel like that's all senior, but that's because I'm older than that, I guess. 55 and older. And we're engaging them in to participate in at least an hour of volunteer time with Cadre. There are lots of opportunities. We are a very small group. There are only right now, I think, 7 or 8 of us on the payroll, and only one person works full time. Many of us only work a few hours a week. We are retired after all, some of us. Anyway, there are a plethora of opportunities, from doing some research, working from home, to helping with a tabling event and passing out information about Cadre. If people have some expertise, or if they've retired from, say, communications or technology assistance, we certainly can always use that kind of help as well. So with that, I think I can turn it over to Lynn. Whoops, computer. Turn it over to Lynn to talk about the objectives for this particular class.
Great.
Lynn?
Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate it. And I'd just like to thank everybody for tuning in today. Appreciate you guys taking time to come out and listen to me. So we're going to start off with first, we're going to talk about 2 big things today. First, of course, as he said, the incident command system. We're going to talk about what it is, how the government uses it. And then hopefully I can show you how your community-based organization or whatever organization you can embrace ICS and use it within your organization. It sounds complicated, but you're probably using some form of it right now. You've used it before in your life, and I'll talk about that as we go along. Go ahead, Cindy. Okay. So the first half we're doing incident command system. In the second half, we're going to talk about public information officer. Talk about the roles and responsibilities of being a PIO. I was a PIO for several years. It can be challenging and it can be fun. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the fundamentals for any person or group that may have PIO responsibilities. We'll do a little bit of writing and delivering. We won't, unfortunately, not a ton of that, but we're going to go through it very quickly. A little bit about how to write a statement. And we'll talk about some resources you can find for more basic and advanced PIO training, because training is a big deal. You don't want to take somebody and just throw them out there to face the media without some kind of training, without some kind of preparation. That's no fun at all. So, okay, next slide, please.
Do you have personal experience to that effect, Lynn?
I have a couple stories I'm going to tell as we go along. Yeah, there's times you just, for a good PIO, you just have to be very comfortable in front of the camera. and able to talk to people. And that's a big deal. So, yeah, I'll share some stories as we go.
Okay.
So we're going to start off though with incident command system. And I am a state certified instructor for ICS. And again, it sounds kind of complicated, but it's stuff you use, but it's a very proven system. The fire service used it for many years. It's an all seen, all hazard concept. It works not just for fire, but it works for a fire, a flood, an earthquake, a birthday party, a wedding, any kind of event you want to have. As I said, emergencies and non-emergencies. It's something that happens right now, or something you're planning for, a year down the road. It works very well. It can be a big event or a small event. It really doesn't matter. ICS really, particularly in a big event, it really helps you organize it, manage it, break it down into manageable pieces. So it works well that way. Big words, but interdisciplinary and organization flexible. It means different fire and police can work together. Public works, other groups can work together within the system. That's part of what makes it work well. And I'll warn you, a lot of what I'm going to talk about, my experience is more with the city. So I use a lot of examples like that, but it also works very well for other organizations. And I'll try to delve into those as we go. And really the bottom line for ICS, it's based on organizational best practices. These are things that work, that we know work, and they've proven themselves over the years. Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Oh, okay.
This computer keeps going to sleep, I think.
Yeah, it's
there.
not okay. So ICS, it actually started in the military long ago. It's a command and control system, but the current iteration really started. There was a thing called Project Firescope in the 1970s, and as firefighters kept responding to urban fires and wildland fires, they kept realizing the same basic things need to happen, and we're going to talk about those as we go along. And as I mentioned earlier, you can use it both emergency and non-emergency events. If something happens at 2 a.m, you can roll out ICS. It helps bring order to the chaos, but also something that you're planning for 6 months from now or a year from now. You can use ICS to plan that. Back in the day when I was working, there was a group called CERT, Community Emergency Response Teams. Most cities in the county have a CERT program. And every year we would have a big countywide exercise. I don't know if anybody may have participated in that, but like 6 months or a year ahead, we would start planning for this exercise. And we use the incident command system to break it down, assign specific roles and responsibilities. And again, organizational best practices, it worked very well. All right, so why do we need ICS? Why do we need this kind of thing to come in and do it? So the big thing is maintaining safety of all our workers, whether it's frontline people or people in the office. We want to be sure everyone is kept safe and is in a safe environment. We also want clear leadership and a good organizational structure. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation there's two situations, I think. One, have you ever been in a situation where you have two bosses? How'd that work out? Did it work out well for anybody? Probably not. And how about if you have a situation where nobody's in charge? You got a group of 10 people and assigned to do something and nobody's in charge. That generally doesn't work out well either. So we want clear leadership and good organizational structure. And using ICS is going to help us improve the overall effectiveness of any effort, anything that we're doing. It's just a good way to organize things. So I've talked about it. So another thing it does, it gives us common terminology. Kind of going back to the Tower of Babel. Everybody's speaking a different language. In ICS, we want to communicate, have good communications and a shared understanding of what we're doing and where we're going. Good communication among team members, both up and down the chain, and a really well-defined management structure, a chain of command is what we're looking for. We know who's in charge, we know who's responsible for which task, and what needs to happen. And that gives us accountability. If someone's assigned something to do, we know who was assigned that task. We can go back and see, was that task accomplished? Was it accomplished well? So it's a good system. It works very well. Okay, so the main objectives of the incident command system right off the bat, you want to identify the scope of the incident. How big is it? What's going on? Is it getting bigger? Is it getting smaller? Are things getting better? Or is it getting worse? We want to know what's going on. We want to set up an overall strategy. What are we going to do? What's our approach to this? We're going to fight, or we're going to run. What are we going to do? Let's have an overall strategy. So once we have a strategy, we can put our resources out, deploy whatever resources we have. And again, ICS gives us a good way to manage those resources as we go through the event. And finally, to document all of our actions and results. If you don't document, it didn't happen. And it's a really good thing. Something more for governments, but also applies to other organizations. If you want any reimbursement, you have to have documentation. As we say in the city, What employee took what equipment to what location to accomplish what task and how long did it take? That's the level of documentation you need. So ICS actually helps do that. Okay. So again, more advantages, common terminology, consolidated action plan. Everybody's on the same page. We're driving toward the same goal. We're on the same page. Comprehensive resource management. We're keeping track of all our resources. We know where they're deployed. We know how to support them, and we can move along on that. And then finally, a span of control. How many people can you manage? The ideal span of control is between about 3 to 7 staff per supervisor. If you've got 10 people, that's just too many. And 1-to-1 is probably not the best ratio either. So a manageable span of control is a big deal for any incident. And we'll talk more about that. Yeah. So common terminology. We want to use plain English as much as possible. I think most of us, we all have some jargon and some code in whatever profession we're in, but in ICS, we want to use common terminology and plain English, and that really helps reduce confusion. Let me give you an example. So when you give someone the order to secure the building, the Marines are going to surround the building, break down the doors, and search for the enemy, set up interlocking fields of fire, and be ready to go. The Army is going to post guards at the gates and check everyone's ID when they come in and out. The Navy is going to turn off the lights, set the alarms, and lock the doors. And finally, the Air Force will measure the space and take out a 3-year lease on the building. So that's a good example of how when you tell someone to accomplish the same task, they can have very different definitions of what that task actually entails. So that is what I mean by common terminology. Let's all get on the same page. Span of control, another important thing. How many people or resources can one supervisor effectively manage? As I mentioned, 3 to 7 is optimal. So as you can see on this little flow chart, we have a supervisor and they've got 5 things underneath. So that's a pretty good span of control. That is manageable. And that is kind of the basic system for ICS. And now we're going to talk about each section of the incident command system.
And that doesn't necessarily mean people when you say resource, it means resource. I mean,
Yeah.
it means
Could be-
the truck or the, whatever the resources are.
Yeah.
So
Could be backhoe, could be a street sweeper. This is what I call span out of control. Okay, if you're trying to do everything yourself, that's a large org chart, so you can see how it would break down. So you can't accomplish all that stuff by yourself. You need a way to break it down. So that's what the incident command system does.
thank goodness that wasn't the case yesterday, because I think I would raise my hand
Yeah.
yesterday. Yesterday looked a lot like you do it all,
You-
Well, but when lives are in the wake, it becomes a whole different issue, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. Okay, so a basic thing in the incident command system, there's one position that always has to be staffed, and that's the incident commander. That is the person in charge. Somebody has to be in charge, and that person is responsible and accountable. And the general principle is the first person on the scene is the incident commander. If you show up first, congratulations, you're in charge. Now, as soon as someone with more ability, more seniority, more skill shows up, you can delegate that responsibility. But in the beginning, the first person is the incident commander. So for instance, in the fire service, when there's a fire and the first engine that gets there, the captain on that engine is the incident commander. Now, when the battalion chief arrives, the higher up the chain, when the battalion chief gets there, he or she will take over. But in the beginning, it's the first person on the scene. You are the incident commander. You're in charge. You need to make those decisions. Okay, so here's our basic structure of the incident command system. And we're going to talk about each one. So as I mentioned, always have an incident commander. Somebody's got to be in charge. And there are 4 things under management. You have operations, planning, logistics, and finance. And we're going to talk in detail about each one. But you can see already we've broken this down. So incident commander only has 4 direct reports: ops, plans, logistics, and finance. Under operations, you have a dozen sections, a dozen teams, groups, task force under that. But they all report to the ops section chief, who reports directly to the incident commander. So it all flows up. It's a good flow chart, just like most organizations have. If you think about it within your organization, somebody's in charge, and then it flows out from there. Okay, so let's talk about management. And management, as the title says, they manage things. They're in charge. That person sets the policy. What are we doing here? What are we trying to accomplish, and how are we trying to accomplish that? And that gives you really good continuity of operations. Because if it goes beyond one shift, more people need to come in. An IC can hand over to another incident commander to manage it. Again, directing the overall emergency response. They're doing pretty much they're in charge. They're deciding what do we need to do, where do we go, how do we get there. And this person, the IC, has ultimate accountability. Pretty much just like in a city, ultimately the city manager has ultimate accountability. In an organization, the CEO generally has ultimate accountability. So it's going to fall on that person. It can be delegated, but somebody's got to be in charge. So let's take a look at how the management section would be set up. And again, this is more in a city setting, but in a very large, you'd have the incident commander. There's generally a scribe there just to keep track, keeping notes, keeping track of everything that's going on, what's happening there. Safety and security, again, is part of the staff to the incident commander, being sure everything's being done in a safe manner, in a secure location. There could be agency reps. There could be, for instance, in a city EOC, you have reps from Highway Patrol, from PG&E, from Valley Water District, from Valley Transportation Agency. The agency reps would also work with the IC. And then finally, and we're going to talk about this in our second half, the Public Information Officer, PIO, very important role, because in this world, it's not enough to do a good job. You have to tell people what a good job you're doing. You have to let them know. And there's also a bonus factor, and we'll talk more about this in PIO, but one of the things back in the old days, you only had to worry about TV crews. Now, everybody has a TV camera in their hand, in their pocket, and that can come. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So then you can see, so that's support staff for the incident manager, incident commander, and then below you see ops, plans, logistics, and finance. So any questions so far on how that's set up? Anybody?
If Cadre was in the Emergency Operations Center, Lynn, where would they be?
Cadre would be under the agency representatives. That's another, just as I said, like PG&E, Caltrans, any organization outside your organization would kind of fit into that category, the agency reps. So everybody get on that? Okay, let's talk about operations. Ops are the doers. Operations are the people that go out and actually do things. And they're going to coordinate all the response efforts, all the things going on, and giving updates to the incident commander and planning and intelligence section. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But ops are the ones actually going out to do. So in a business setting, in your setting, for example, operations might be people, if you had someone that's in charge of evacuating everyone out of the office in the event of evacuation, who's in charge of each floor. If you have people, for instance, in charge of fire suppression, who has the fire extinguisher to check if there's a fire? Can we do that? So operations are the people out in the fields, getting their hands dirty, actually doing stuff. And so for instance, on the operations section, you could have units like fire suppression, people responsible for, actively putting out fires or checking for fires. Medical care, if you set up a first aid station and you have folks on scene, they're actually providing care to other folks, that falls into the operations section. Search and rescue, someone's going door to door and checking all the offices, checking the bathroom, checking the hallways, be sure everybody's out. That's search and rescue. And then finally, care and shelter. If you're going to have to, as I said, keep people overnight, that kind of thing, that would be important. And I see a question. I believe we do have, correct, Cindy?
Yes.
We do have.
We will provide on our webpage under library, there will be this presentation recorded as well as the slides.
But so just go back 1 second, Cindy, if you would,
All right.
back to ops. So you can see all those things, and you could put, a dozen more under operations, but operations are the people that are out doing things. That's what's going on. Okay. All right. Next up, we got planning and intelligence. And the easy way planning tells it, they plan ahead and keep track of what's happening. Somebody needs to keep track of what's happening, and somebody needs to look down the road and think, what are we going to do an hour from now? What about 2 hours from now? What about tomorrow? Where are we going? So planning and intelligence, they collect and analyze all the information coming in. So operations, anything operations does, they need to let planning know about it. Like we're suppressing a fire over here, they need to know. We got the fire out, let them know about it. We search the building, the building secure, let plans know about that. Planning will develop situation reports. They're going to work very closely with the incident commander. And just like they said, they're providing intelligence. What's going on out in the field. They're also keeping track of all the media, what's being said about us. They're watching the weather reports. They're watching, flood reports. If it's a flooding, all that stuff. It's a big job for plans and intelligence. They're intelligent and planning ahead. They're going to keep all the documentation. They're going to, keep a written record, how many people do we have? What's going on? What time did we do this? How's it going? How long did it take? All that sort of stuff goes into documentation. Action planning, we could do a whole 8-hour seminar on action planning itself. I've been to classes that lasted, seemed like a week in one day. But action planning is deciding what in the next, you set something called an operational period. In the next hour or the next 2 hours, the next 24 hours, what are we going to do? What is our plan of action? What are we going to do first? What are we going to do second? How do we make that plan work? And then finally, advanced planning. Let's talk about tomorrow. Let's look at, is it going to rain tonight? Is it going to snow tomorrow? What's going on down the line? That's what planning and intelligence needs to do, is keep track of that so they can make good plans moving down the line. And their section could look something. And again, it would be different in every situation. Every agency could have slightly different standards, but an example of plans section could have a situation status unit. And that's, when you watch movies and TV and you see the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, they always have the big board. And sometimes it's written, sometimes it's computers, but they keep track, which fire trucks are here, what are people doing over there. But there's a sit stat that the incident commander can look at a glance and know what's going on. As I mentioned earlier, advanced planning. What are we going to do tomorrow? What about next week? What about, way down the line? GIS, Geographic Information System, becoming much more a big thing than it used to be. I remember in the day you had the big map of the city and you stuck pins in it and you drew arrows and stuff. Now you do most of that stuff on a computer screen. And someone in GIS can show you all the streets, the overlays, the sewers, the electrical system, all those kind of things very quickly to keep that information. Demobilization, believe it or not, even as you set up, you want to start thinking about breaking down. So demob would be the team that would help, at the end of a situation, start sending people back to their regular jobs. How do we, again, keeping track of everybody and doing good documentation. And you may need technical specialists of various kinds with that. You might need somebody that's good with, good with computers, good with telephones, good with whatever, just to make sure you keep all your stuff running within the plans section. So planning, very important job. Logistics, like the name says, they get things. I need more people, call logistics. I need more equipment. I need raincoats. I need radios. I need, whatever you might need. It's the job of logistics to round that up for you. And again, pretty big job. When I worked in the city of Mountain View, we made our purchasing officer the logistics section chief, because we figured, hey, they buy stuff all the time, so let's put them in charge of logistics. They're going to get whatever we need. Logistics also responsible for communications within the organization. So if you're talking to, you want to be sure you communicate with the people in the field, you can communicate within the sections. That's the job of logistics. They get whatever you might need, logistics gets it. So let's take a look at there. So again, within logistics, you can have a couple different sections or different teams, their units. Communications, obviously, radios, telephones, telegraph, whatever system you might want to use. Communication keeps that working. Transportation, that can be a huge issue. How are you moving people around? Are you having, say, operations says, hey, we need to evacuate an apartment complex. They're going to tell logistics, we need some buses. So logistics, for instance, might call the Valley Transportation Agency, round up some buses, see if they can move those people around. So very important job. Facilities, do we have a safe place to have our emergency operations center? Do we have a place for our command staff to be to get this information? Resources, kind of the catch-all, any other resource you might need, it's going to be up to logistics to round that up. And finally, personnel. Logistics is in charge of HR for, in an incident system. So you would want so if you got volunteers or mutual aid coming from another agency or another group, they would go to logistics, to the personnel, and then they would be assigned out where they need to go. So again, they're all important parts. And let me be clear too, we talk about this and we're talking, huge numbers, but one person could be the IC and ops and plans and logistics if the incident's small. If the incidents get bigger, that's when you need more people and more sections coming in to handle it. And now we're down to the one I always called father of the bride, finance administration. Finance has to pay for things. They have to keep track. So they're going to put input, all the plans for financial and cost analysis. Like, hey, we want to do this, and finance is going to say, how much is that going to cost? Hopefully you have the money, but finance is up to them to keep track of it. Any financial obligation documents would be the job of finance, the finance section. All the incident cost summaries, they're keeping track of how many personnel hours are we using, how much equipment we bought, how much money we spent. And then finally, claims and compensation. There could be claims on your organization afterward and compensation, things like that. So it's up to admin, finance admin to keep track of all that stuff. Very big job, a lot of moving parts, but they have to keep track of everything because down the line and documentation is very important. I went to some seminars back in the day and heard some horror stories of cities that had an emergency, a flood, an earthquake, tornado, whatever, and did all kind of emergency stuff, did not document it well. Got some money from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management. They were already on the spot, ready to give them a check. And then they audited and said, hey, you owe us $9 million back. We gave you a bunch of money and you didn't document it, so you have to pay it back to us now. So that's the kind of thing that can happen. So you want to be very careful with all your, all your documentation.
When I was working in the field full time, I worked for the county, and the county's director of procurement was actually our finance administrator. She did have someone from her team work in logistics, in purchasing and logistics, but it was her job to keep that whole finance and admin team going because it was her responsibility when the disaster was over to have all the documentation that was going to be needed in order to be reimbursed.
And they are meticulous on that documentation. They want to see everything. Okay, so again, under finance, you could have timekeeping. Everybody turning their timesheets, keeping track how much time, where we're going, what are we doing. Cost accounting, obviously, you want to keep track of how much you're spending. You might have to spend an emergency, but you can't spend beyond your means. You have to, or have access to some money. As I mentioned, claims and compensation. People are going to file a claim. You want to stay on top of that. Usually, you'd have your if you have a risk manager in your agency that would be assigned to this finance section as well. As Cindy just mentioned, purchasing is part of finance and also very tightly tied with logistics. So they'd be working closely together. And then finally, cost recovery. What money can we recover? Can we get money back? Can we file a claim? Whether it's with an insurance company or the federal government or the state government, whatever it might be, that's going to be the job of finance to keep track of that stuff. So that's a quick overview of the different parts of ICS. And again, our objectives are going to identify the scope of the incident, set up our overall strategy, set our priorities, and then try to get our resources out there to handle that particular emergency. So we're going to do a little exercise next, I think. But does any questions so far on the incident command system? Does it make sense how it all kind of ties together and those groups work together?
One thing I just want to point out, Lynn, your top box said EOC director. Can you tell us what the difference is?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. So the EOC is the Emergency Operations Center. And that's when, and again, most cities have them. A lot of large organizations might have them as well. So that's when you have a large event, you open your Emergency Operations Center, and that's your command center. That's where everything is run through that one location. All the information is flowing into the EOC. So generally, your incident commander is the EOC director. And if you think about it, and I'll go back to a city example. Let's say you have, a big earthquake. So you have an overall incident, the incident commander, city manager in the EOC is running that. You could have a dozen incidents in the field. Each has their own incident commander, but they're all reporting back to the Emergency Operations Center. It's the nerve center. That's the command and control center.
Thank you.
Okay, so hopefully everybody's good. Okay, so let me do group participation here. I'm going to ask you guys, if all the lights are out, you need flashlights, who are you going to ask for help? Anybody?
Logistics?
Beg pardon?
Logistics?
Logistics, that is correct. Yeah, logistics gets things. So
Penny's got it.
get logistics in there. Oh, thank you. Okay, I see it pop up there. Okay, somebody smells gas but can't turn it off at the meter. Who would get that job?
Jeanette?
Anybody? Did I hear a no?
Henry?
No. Well, see, but now you need somebody to do something. So this would be operations because you need somebody to turn that meter off, figure out how to turn off. That would be ops. Okay. Batteries for the portable radio are dead. Need more batteries. Somebody needs to. Yep. I'd go logistics again. You know, that's if you need something, you go to logistics. Okay, here's one. Fire from another area is moving towards your building. Who would who would handle that?
They're not going to be putting the fire out necessarily, right? They're going to be trying to plan for what we're going to do because this is happening.
So definitely be the planning. They would want to know where's the fire, how fast is it moving, what's the wind direction, what's humidity, all that kind of stuff would come into play. The incident commander is about to hand over command and needs a briefing. Who would be in charge of that?
So they need a briefing of what's been happening, of the situations. Is that
Yep, that's so we need plans. So that would be, that would be the planning section. Definitely would have all the information right there ready to go. And then the new incident commander would be ready to take over with everything that's happened so far. As I mentioned earlier, continuity of operations. I think there's just a couple more of these. There we go. Okay, this one's too easy. You need to buy food and water for your team members.
hey, lunch is important.
Lunch is important, like Bob Marley says, a hungry man is an angry man, right? So you got to do things right. And then finally, a TV news crew arrives and wants to film your activities. Who's got that? Got to be the PIO. That's the public information. But the PIO would talk to the incident commander first to be sure, plans to get all the updates, talk to the incident commander, and then go out. And that's going to lead us into our next section. But I do have, I think, one more little exercise. Oh, here we go. Okay. So this is one. Organizations planning a volunteer recognition event. So this is a kind of a real life example of something going on that could be happening in your organization. Volunteer, how are we going to use the incident command system for a volunteer recognition event? So let's go through it. I think it's the next slide, Cindy. So what would management do for that? Any thoughts? You got a hand up? No? Participation is easier, I think, live than it is on Zoom. But
Sorry,
we'll move in. Okay, so what does management do? Go ahead and pop the next. Okay, so the manage things. So some examples of what management might be doing. And I think these will pop up on the next. There we go. So management would probably choose the team, who's going to do this event. Hopefully delegate, tell the team leaders. And then, of course, the manager would be this, signing off and final authority for decisions. We're definitely going to have the event. Let's get some team leaders out there. Let's make it happen. That's what management would do. That's their part, their slice of the pie. Then let's take a look at planning. So planning keeps track and plans. So planning would plan the event. They'd set the date. They'd set the time for the event. The program, the theme, structure. Is it going to be karaoke? Are we going to play Jeopardy? We're going to have balloons. We're going to punch, that kind of stuff. They'd set up the agenda and all the flow, and they would plan everything. The guest list, keynote speakers, decorations, all those things would be plans. So operations. Okay, thanks. Operations actually does things. So they would, on the day of the event, they'd be setting up. They'd be getting stuff ready to go. Welcome the guests, greet the VIPs, coordinate the program, do the speaking, have an MC, coordinate with the speakers, and then demobilization. Like I mentioned, after the event, clean it up, clear it out, get everything ready for the next time. So operations would be doing stuff, making out. So management's in charge, planned it. Okay, logistics. Again, for a situation like this, logistics get stuff. They get it. So they would set up so planning would decide where to have it. Logistics would actually make the reservation. They'd order the supplies, get the tablecloths, get the name tags, get all the awards, all that kind of thing. They'd oversee the venue. They'd make sure it was set up correctly. Operations would set up, but plans would be the ones setting it up and getting people to work the event. Excuse me, logistics would be getting people to actually work the event. How many people do we need? What are their job responsibilities? Where do they go from here? So that's logistics. And then finally, finance. And you know what they're going to do, right? They're going to pay for it. So they're going to set the budget. Now, hopefully, they're working with plans ahead of time and say, okay, we've got $10 to spend, $10 per person, $1,000 per event, whatever it might be. They would track all the expenses, registration and receipts, keeping track of what about next year's event, how much did it cost? Do we get a good deal? Do we get a discount if we go back next year? A final accounting for everybody, reporting the entire event, how much stuff, what went on, how did it go? And they would keep track of all that and save the records. Again, if there was any chance for reimbursement, they would file to do that. So that is very quickly, you've just gotten like an 8-hour class in about 45 minutes here of the incident command system.
A good friend of mine decided that she was going to use the incident command system to plan her wedding. And she had one big issue. She couldn't figure out who should be the incident commander. Should it be her or her mother? Her mother thought it should be her mother. But it was very clear who was going to pay for the thing. It was dad. So
yeah, father of the bride. And that's usually the example I use. I always use the wedding as an example for ICS. And, if you think about it, you probably used ICS in your life at some point. If you've ever planned a family reunion, use the incident command system. A big vacation, you probably use the incident command system. You break it down a little bit. The one I like, you're doing the wedding, so planning section, you have to maybe see Uncle Bob and Uncle Jerry don't sit next to each other because when they drink, they argue and then we have a fight, so that's not a good thing. So planning, very important. So again, incident command system, how can you use it in your organization? It's really good for organizing the staff. It's a way to break it down, communicating with field offices, satellite offices, and it's a total team approach and gives you a good span of control. It's a way to assign things so everyone knows, what their job is, who they report to, and what they need to do. So any questions about the incident command system? I guess I did a good job explaining it. Yay. That's cool. So I am going to give you, we're not going to do it
Henry's
right.
got his hand up, Lynn.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Henry.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, I just had a quick question about
Sure.
like we're talking about events and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I was just curious about the airspace, if there was supposed to be like some kind of communication to the FAA.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you're talking particularly controlled airspace, yeah, you would definitely want to talk to the FAA. That would be one of the big, it's funny when you said airspace, that's the first thing I thought about is the FAA. Either start at the local control district or go directly to the feds and ask about that. But yeah, that is a concern you would have. So if you were bringing helicopters, for an event, you'd want to be sure you'd work with the local air traffic controllers, and if there need any special permits or anything like that were needed.
I can assure you that the Super Bowl planning has the FCC involved.
Yeah, don't get me started on the Super Bowl. That is a sore subject, I'll tell you. So just one last chance. So anything else on incident command?
Oh.
Everybody get
That's only because you live really close to Levi Stadium, Lynn.
true. Actually, can you go back one slide, Cindy?
Sure.
Yeah. So what I would like to do, we're not going to do it today. We have a lot of stuff still to cover, but when we finish this session, or while we're doing it, take a minute and draw an ICS chart for your organization. Take a look at it and do it two ways. Do one, what is normal day-to-day operations? And then how are we set up in an emergency? Who would be filling each of those roles? Because your day-to-day role may be different than your role in an incident or during an emergency. Could be very different, but it might be interesting to take a look. And a lot of times, if you actually chart it out, you see how many times the same person's name comes up in too many places. So that gives you an idea. You might want to look at diversifying a little bit and delegating and getting some cross training. So more than one person. I've heard a thing, and they said if someone's indispensable, fire them immediately because you don't want your business hanging on one person, right? So again, that'd be my homework assignment to you. Take a few minutes, draw out an org chart, and think about in your organization, who's command, who's ops, who's plans, who's logistics, and who's finance. Is usually pretty easy. Who writes the checks. But other than that, take a few minutes and do that if you would. Okay, so that winds us up with the incident command system. And now on to public information.
Timing is good.
So we're going to talk about the role and responsibilities of the PIO, the Public Information Officer. And, in emergency management, we do love acronyms. I don't know if your organizations love it as much as we do, but acronyms, ICS, PIO, all that good stuff. So hopefully I'm going to help you increase the awareness of fundamentals for anybody with any person or group with PIO responsibilities. Could be you. We'll do a little bit of writing. We're not going to do a ton of that. We have a lot of stuff to cover, but a little bit about it toward the end. And we're going to give you some resources for more basic and advanced PIO training. And let me emphasize again, it is important to get training for your PIO. You don't want to throw somebody to the wolves. Just throw them out there and face the cameras without any training, any preparation. Some people are naturals. Some people do it pretty easily. Other people need a lot of training. But it does help to have some training. Even if you're good at it, you're good with people, there's still some things to think about. And so we have, a little more than an hour here to go. And I'm not going to make you an expert in PIO by any means, but you're going to know a little bit about it. At least, it's one of those things, maybe you'll know what you don't know, and it's where to start. And I'll give you an example, kind of my progression into becoming a PIO. I was a communication, I have a degree in communications, when I went to school. Got out, I worked in Sunnyvale for several years, and I attended down at the California Specialized Training Institute down in San Luis Obispo, has a PIO course. And I went there three different sessions there, which is, about a week-long session on how to be a good PIO and practice. And then once I went to Mountain View and became the PIO, working with the media pretty regularly. If you have, any kind of incidents, you work with them pretty regular. So, it took me several years to become comfortable in the position, but the more you do it, the better at you get. And it makes you more aware. And when you mess up, you go, man, I really messed that up. So
I remember when
happens
you were
occasionally.
working. I remember when you were working for Mountain View, I would always see that your face on the news, and you had been there at 3 o'clock in the morning at that fire.
That's part of the fun. What I used to tell people, so as a PIO for the fire department, I didn't go to every fire. I just went to the big fires. If somebody got injured, somebody got killed, or multiple alarms, I would have to be there. And that's, and people, oh, I saw you on TV. It happens. But, the important thing is you have to be there, and you have to be ready, and you have to tell them, what's going on. That's the key role. We suited up, we showed up, we're on the job, and we'll release more information as it becomes available. So I'm going to share what little knowledge I have with you as we go along. So public information, the definition, any information, regardless of form or format, that an agency or organization discloses, disseminates, or makes available to the public. So it's basically the stuff we're saying, we're putting it out there to the public and putting it out there. And it could be, communications plans, crisis communications. That's mostly what, you think about when you think of a PIO, advocacy and public awareness. And you tend to see people, at bad times, but it also happens, a part of being a good PIO is laying that foundation, getting the word out day to day, forming some relationships with the media as you go along. So that's public information. Okay, PR, public relations, is more on marketing, and you're trying to improve the image of a company, an organization, or individual. And that's something you can do it in-house, or you can have hire somebody to do PR for you. Everybody connected with the organization, though, does PR every day for good or bad. If I'm doing a good class for Cadre and people go, man, that was a good class, I like that. That's good PR. If I do a class and don't have a good day and people go, man, that wasn't very good, that's not good PR for Cadre. That's me not doing a good job. So, we're all representatives of our organization. Think about that when you're out in public. And you see more and more of it nowadays. As I mentioned earlier, everybody has a cell phone now. Everybody, pretty much anything is recorded. I just saw, I don't want to get controversial, but I just saw a clip online the other day, someone at a baseball game. And one fan's yelling at another fan, and the guy looked Hispanic. She starts yelling, call ice, call ice. And, wound up being escorted from the stadium, wound up losing her job over it for being offensive. So there's stuff out there, and you have to pay attention. Think about what you're saying, because we're all on camera all the time. I'll tell you my personal story real quick of when I learned this the hard way. When I worked in Mountain View, we had a call of a possible terrorist thing at Google. Someone had sent an envelope with an unidentified powder in it. Thought it might be dangerous. So, we had a big response, and I went out. Luckily, no media on the scene, so I'm just kind of hanging out. And I also did some logistics for the department. So I took I got some cookies and snacks and stuff, some drinks, took it out to the firefighters. It was a warm day. So I'm kind of hanging out, and there's no media, so I don't have to do anything. I'm eating a cookie, and watching everybody. Didn't think anything about it. So that evening, I go home, and it resolved. It wasn't dangerous after all. But I go home that evening, and I open a beer and sit down on the couch, and I'm watching Channel 5, and they go, this just in from Google, potential terrorist. And it's like, what? I didn't see any media. And turned out somebody had walked by with their camera, filmed it, and there I was on camera eating a cookie. there's the Mountain View PIO eating a cookie, and not talking to me because there was no legacy media on the scene. So that's just my warning to you. Cameras are everywhere, and you're doing PR or PIO what you think you are. Okay, so the role of the PIO, again, very important role. We're going to implement the communication strategies to the whole community. So again, as part of our incident command team, we have a communication strategy. What are we doing? What information we want to put out to the public? And we want to give the right message to the right people at the right time. You want to get it out there and really helping people before, during, and certainly after an emergency. It's not just during the event. It's a lot of stuff before and a lot of follow-up after. It's a nonstop job being a PIO. As Cindy mentioned, if you're the PIO, you can expect on occasion that call at 3 in the morning, and we have something you need to deal with it. Okay, so again, roles. So you're giving information out, really the incidents or the functions of the organization, or anything else, anything of interest that your group wants to get out. That's the job of the PIO, the public information officer, is putting out. And again, it's probably in a larger organization. It's not just one person. You can have a public information team. You have several people, but it's also helpful to have one person be the face of the organization. There's a guy, and I cannot think of his name now. If you watch the news regularly, the San Francisco airport, they have a very good PIO there. And I cannot think of his name, but you see him when they have anything relating to the airport, you'll see him on TV, and he does a really good job. So he's a recognizable face of the airport. Another big thing, back one real quick, Cindy, back one.
Sorry.
There we go. The 95-5 concept. So about 95% of the PIO's work is done in non-emergency times. You're kind of laying the groundwork, you're forming the relationships, you're getting the information out, you're staying prepared. And about 5% directly related to incident, response or recovery. So, it's not all the time. Now that could vary depending on where you work. If you work for a very active sheriff's department, that could be different. But generally, most of your work is done in non-emergency times, get you ready for when that emergency does occur. Okay, now let's move on. So the primary function, you're going to gather, verify, coordinate, and disseminate information that's accurate and accessible and timely. You want to put it out there, the right information at the right time, as I said, to the right people. You're going to keep track of you're monitoring the media and all the information, traditional media, TV, radio, press, the web has changed things completely, and social media. And I'll admit to you, I retired as social media was becoming a very big thing. So I'm a pretty good traditional PIO. I do not have a lot of background in social media. Savannah's going to help us out a little bit here, talking about social media with some tips on that. But you got to be watching everything, kind of 360 vision. What's going around? What are people saying? What's the big story? What's going on? How can we approach this? How can we get our message out? That's what the PIO needs to be thinking. Okay, so again, primary function, provide information to all stakeholders, and that includes people within the organization, people outside the organization, the public at large. Definitely going to be participating in planning meetings. As the section chiefs are meeting and planning their strategy, the PIO needs to be involved in that, so it can say with confidence, here's what we're going to do, here's our plan moving forward. And a big thing, rumor control. If word's getting out, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, you have to keep track on it. Sometimes word just gets out, people start doing things, and you need to be ready. Going way back, one of the things, kind of a rumor thing I remember after the Loma Prieta earthquake, and this is actually before I was an emergency manager, I got the story secondhand, but people decided, well, we need to collect some clothes for all those poor people over in Santa Cruz, in Watsonville. And somehow the word got out, hey, bring all your clothes to this park. And all of a sudden there was a mound, a 30, 40 foot mound high of clothes. Everybody emptied their closets, got their old coats and old jackets and stuff. And suddenly a huge pile of clothing appeared in this park, and then it rained on it. So basically it was useless. But, good rumor control, get the word out, don't go to the park. Here's a proper collection center. That's the kind of thing you want to try to stay ahead of. Okay. So rumor control, big deal. Good.
I was involved in a wildland fire event a few years ago, and rumor control is so important, not just to the PIO and to the public, but it's also important to all of the other functions in the EOC, because we go out there in the field. I was there as as a large animal evacuation, part of a large animal evacuation team. And even just knowing what the rumors were, you know, and then when we're out there in the field, we can confirm those rumors or figure out whether or not they're actually true. So they had a big board up in their PIO room that had all the rumors and then all the reality based on those rumors. And it was so helpful because then when I went out in the field, I could tell people, yeah, that's a rumor that's going around and here's the real information. So you don't have to be a PIO to actually be able to share information like that. That's that public relations part when a disaster happens.
Yep. And I'll tell you one more story. It may have been the same incident, Cindy. You can probably back me up on this. She mentioned large animals, and there was one of the fires, and I can't remember which one, but there were a lot of horses and cattle involved. And some group in Texas decided, hey, we're going to help our friends in California out. So they got a couple semis loaded up with hay, and we're headed them toward the border to California. We're going to provide hay to help those poor folks out. When we got to the border, the inspection station said, no, you can't bring that hay in here because it has been fumigated. It might have some weird pest that we don't have in California. So you can't have it. You cannot bring that. And people go, oh, you're being so mean to us. Like, well, no, see, that's a good PIO has to, tell people don't bring unauthorized stuff, and try to make not to make the transportation people look bad. They're just doing their job saying, you could infect our crops here by bringing that stuff in. So, people have good intentions, but you have to help them out sometimes. More functions. So we're going to monitor the media and any relevant information. We're going to get that through the chain. And again, as I mentioned earlier, traditional media, that's the big one, the web and social media. And social media has just blown up. A lot of people don't trust now. There's, distrust of the mainstream media, the legacy media as it's known. And they'll go to social media. They'll get the news from Facebook or, other sites like that. So you have to be active in all those areas now. You can't just kind of stick your head in the sand and say, I'm only going to talk to the networks. You can't do that. You have to reach out and be aware of what's going on. Okay. So we're going to develop accurate, accessible, and timely information. We're going to get out to press briefings, written media releases, and as I said earlier, more and more now web and social media posts. Putting that word out, you're going to reach a lot more people a lot more quickly that way, and you don't have the filter of the media kind of in between. I guess that's the one of the good sides of it. But the other side is, again, rumors can take off very quickly on social media and just blow up before you know what's going on. Again, PIO is going to manage inquiries from the media, the public, and elected officials. The PIO is going to be pretty heavily involved probably in alert and warning systems. And as we mentioned, rumor control and response. And do you want to throw in a little, Cindy, about the Alert SEC?
Sure. Santa Clara County has a program called Alert SEC. If you still have a landline, I don't think anybody does, but if you still have a landline, they already have your number and can do notifications to your landline recorded phone calls. If you have a cell phone, however, they don't have that information. So you have to go to alertsec.gov and register your phone. When you do that, you'll get local emergency information as it happens, and you can register not just for your location where you live, but say your parents live on the other side of town or in another town within Santa Clara County. You can register for that location as well, and you'll get notices from that area as well. That is local alerts and warnings. It's different from the federal government site. The federal government site doesn't need you to register. They can send out notifications without registration. But the local government alert and warning needs to have you register. So go to alertsec.gov.
Yep. Alert warning, very important. Put the word out there. So what makes a good PIO? Oh, one good PIO. So yeah, you got to be comfortable. You have to be assertive, but not obnoxious. Again, you can effectively navigate in a dynamic situation. You have to be able to think on your feet, seek out important information, and give. So you're doing two things. You're giving good advice to leadership. You're also dealing with the media and the public. So you have to be comfortable in that role. And you want to work to build good relationships. I talked about the 95-5 rule. So the more stuff you've done ahead of time to build relationships, the better it's going to be, particularly in the legacy media. I used to talk to the same 3 or 4 reporters just about every week. So I knew them, I could talk to them and have somewhat of a relationship. I still didn't trust them, but you can build somewhat of a relationship. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So when the media calls, so this is kind of, we talked about the concept of PIO. These are some of the things that a PIO should or should not do. So reporters are really good at trying to get you to say something beyond what you might not want to say. So watch out for leading questions. Wouldn't you say, and then they'll put an idea out for you to agree or disagree with. So you always want to make your own statement. Don't let them put words in your mouth. Isn't it true that you want to have your own statement ready to go? You want to think about what you say before you say it. I mean, you can improvise a little bit, but you have to be ready, to put stuff out there right away. Oh, oops, sorry. I've got my batteries running low. I had to plug in there. Sorry. Okay. Think about what you say. Keep your comments positive and to the point. Don't get into and don't repeat a negative. If they say something negative, don't say it again. You can refute it. Say that's not true. That is not correct. You need to find a way to say that and be direct. And you have to have that. I don't know how to say. You just need presence. When you're there, when you're on camera, you have to. You have to look believable and sound believable. You have to be confident. You have to be sure. Okay, so again, keep your answers pretty simple, pretty brief. If you can do it in 10 words, don't use 100 words. Particularly with broadcast media, if you just keep going and going and going, you can overwhelm people. So really, you're more likely to get a quote if you have a brief, simple answer. Try to do make 3 points. Blah blah blah. We did this. We did this. We did that. Don't get into 47 points. Well, and then back in 1953, the city council decided no, you want to have clear, concise talking points and put them out. But you still need to appear friendly, and cheerful. You don't want to be negative Nancy on the TV screen.
They love it when you do it in sound bites.
Yeah. Think in sound bites. So another thing is talk. Don't pontificate. Don't you just want to talk to people. When you're dealing with the camera, we think it was like having a conversation with them. So use simple language. I mentioned earlier how much we all love acronyms and jargon. Don't do that. Don't be using ICS and PIO and ATA and things like that. If there's an acronym, you usually spell it out. Instead of saying SEC Santa Clara County, that kind of thing. Be careful. And as I just said earlier, kind of limit yourself to 3 main points. If you make 3 main points, ... it's a lot easier. If 1 or 2 better, but 3 is about what you want. Keep your answers fairly short and to the point, and let the interviewer ask you the question. Sometimes you don't want to volunteer too much. You can spin a little bit, but the big thing is you have to tell the truth. If you're trying to mess around and lie or talk about stuff, it's not going to work out well for you. People are going to find out. For those of you that are of a certain age, have you ever heard of Baghdad Bob? Have you heard of him? So back during during the Iraqi invasion back in whatever year that, back in the 90s, I think, and they had their foreign press officer was I can't remember his actual name, but Mohammed Baghdadi, but they called him Baghdad Bob. And his thing was, no, everything's fine, it's all calm here. You could hear bombs exploding in the background as he's talking. You can see planes flying. No, there's no American troops in our city. We're going to prevail. So you don't want to be a Baghdad Bob. You don't want people to make fun of you for what you're saying. Stay on top of it. Okay. Yeah. So here's the big thing. Don't let a reporter get you to say more than you want to say. Okay. The interview is not over until the reporter leaves. And that's a fact. And for me personally, I never did off the record. Some PIOs, if they have a good relationship with media, will do off the record. I never did off the record. Anything that I said, I was not afraid to see it on the front page the next day. That's an important thing. And they have some cool tricks they can do. One of my very first encounters with the media as a PIO, I was still in Sunnyvale. I wasn't the official public information officer for the department, but I had some PIO training, and we had a rather unusual, there was a thunderstorm, and it was, people were kind of freaking out because, big thunderstorm, which is not usual in the Bay Area. And they sent a reporter out for some reason to Sunnyvale, and I had to go talk to him. And they said something about lightning. And we did the interview. I thought we were all done. And then I'm talking to the reporter, they turned off their camera and they're putting their mic away and we're getting ready to go. And I told them a story that when I lived in Florida, I'm from Florida originally, my folks once, a lightning hit their TV antenna and came down and blew out their TV. And I just kind of told the story, didn't think much about it. And then once again, I'm watching the interview later on TV, and they do the matter, and they say, in fact, Mr. Brown told us that his family TV once got blown up by lightning. I'm like, oh, I didn't think that was part of the interview. I thought that was after we were finished. So the interview isn't finished until the reporter has left and can no longer hear you. That's when the interview is over. So again, more skills of a good PIO. Okay, knowledgeable, you need to know everything about all your organization's operations. What goes on, how do we manage that, where do we go? You need to be a very good public speaker. You have to be comfortable talking to people, and it helps to be a pretty good writer. You have to write out what you're going to say. You need to be able to think on your feet. Have your facts, be ready to go, and be ready. And we'll talk in a minute about anticipated questions. Organization is definitely a key. I am not the most organized person in the world, but when it came to PIO stuff, I had my facts straight, had stuff written down, and I didn't say anything that I couldn't back up. That's very important. And networked, know your other PIOs and resources. One of the things we have, and we won't do further acronyms, but something as part of the incident command system is having a joint information center. So if we have a big countywide emergency, all the PIOs should be talking. So we're all putting out the same message, letting the public know, not giving contradictory messages. One jurisdiction says stay at home, the other one says run. You want to kind of work that stuff out. So networking is a good thing. Thanks. Okay. So when the media calls you, you're just having lunch one day and something happens, and all of a sudden you're getting phone calls. How do you deal with that? Here's some tips and tricks. So somebody called. What's the name of the reporter and what organization? They'll usually tell you, hey, this is Bob from KCBS or Joe from KPIX, that kind of thing. Ask them what's the story about and what's their deadline. If they have a deadline, if they're asking questions, say, hey, can I get back to you? That kind of thing. You may not have all the information at hand. So what's going on? What's your point? What are you trying to do? What's your deadline? And keep track. It's much easier now. Back in the day, I had to write everything down. Now most voicemail systems give you an email as well, so it's easier to track. But keep track of who you're talking to and what's going on. Okay, and again, know your key message. Always have your key message ready to go. Save lives, protect property. Things like that. But what's your most important point? That's the one thing you want to say. What do you want to get across? And as I said earlier, probably 3. If you make 3 points, that's great. What do you want the reporter to tell the audience? Okay, that's the big thing. Reporters trying to use you, you want to use that reporter. You want to shape it and get it out there so that you can get your message out to the people that need to hear it. And finally, use every interview as an opportunity to convey your message. You want to be on message all the time. And hey, don't forget, blah, 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 whatever your message might be. You always want to be putting that out there. You do want to be repetitive in this particular instance. Okay, so the biggest thing when the media calls, you want to be prepared. And the big things, who, what, when, where, why. Those are the things, who did it, why did they do it, when did they do it, where did they do it, and what's going to happen because of it. And it's great if you have any supporting facts, any examples on hand and ready to go. If you can say, we can tell you this definitely because this happened last year and this happened, or it happened last week and here's what we did. Any information you can have that'll help back stuff up goes a long way toward being prepared. And again, just being ready all the time. That's your key. Now, a couple things. Don't don't make stuff up. Don't be afraid to admit you don't know something. If you don't have the information, say, I don't know. Do not give inaccurate or incorrect information. If you're not sure, don't say it. You have to be absolute rock positive. You want to be 100% on what you're talking about. And if you don't know, just tell them, hey, I don't have that information right now. Let me get back to you. But tell them you'll get it and get back, but always follow through. One of my standards was, well, the regulations in the area are changing very quickly. Let me review that. I'll take a look and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. But then be sure you get back to them. You can't blow people off. You have to be dependable, and they're much more likely to trust you as a source. So there's not a ton of this as much as there used to be, but radio is still an important media. And if you are on the radio, it's all in your voice. They can't see you. They can't see you waving your hands around. They can't see, how good looking you are. It's all in your voice. So lots of expression. And one of the things you want to do is vary your voice a little bit from low to high. I have a clear memory in college of one of my professors brought in recording. For your old people out there, remember Walter Cronkite? If you remember Walter on CBS News, Walter Cronkite. And he had a very distinct way, and they had a frequency meter, and you could see it, Walter Cronkite, how much his voice varied as he gave his thing. So on the radio, it's very important. Be very animated and get your word out there. And be enthusiastic. Oh, why are you calling me? No, hey, I'm happy to talk about our program, and here's what we're trying to accomplish today for the good of the community, stuff like that. And you want to kind of paint a picture for the listener. Your words are what you're going by. That's all you have in the sense. So try to paint a colorful picture for them. And if you're going to tell a story, you want to keep it short. You can't have a long, involved story that takes too long because they'll cut you off. Most radio clips are going to be like maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes at the most. So if you're on the air with them, keep it interesting. Be cool, have a good voice, and that'll make you sound a lot better on the radio. It's also, and I'll tell you this too, it's kind of weird when you watch your interviews of yourself, your voice is going to sound a little different than it does in your head. You probably experienced this. So just be aware of that. So lots of expression. Okay. Okay. And sometimes the PIO is not the spokesperson. You may need to have someone else doing the speaking. For instance, again, maybe it's more important that your CEO come out and do that, or in a city, the city manager, maybe a councilman, elected official. So understand, advise them on any information release. Be sure they know what they're saying. Don't let them. Also make it clear to them they can't freelance. Here's your talking points. Here's what you need to say. So get your approval for public materials you're going to put out, and prepare officials for media briefings. You always want to be sure they're ready to go. If you have to, tours, outreach events, interviews. Again, you can't make them a PIO in a few short hours, but you can tell them here's some basic things you need to say, and here's some things you probably shouldn't say. Probably not the best to let's not air that dirty laundry in public this week. Okay, let's keep that to ourselves. Okay, so let's say there's actually a press conference, which you can call those. They still happen, and of course now they can be virtual. You don't have to have 40 cameras in your face. But know your audience. Are you talking to seniors? Are you talking to teenagers? Are you talking to adults? What is your age group? Kind of what's your demographic, and what kind of concerns would they have? For instance, if you were talking something about dealing with a skate park, you're probably going to have different people listening to that than people talking about maybe lawn bowling, something like that. Maybe, or I'm sorry, what is it, pickleball? Pickleball versus skateboarding, you're going to have probably two completely different audiences. So what are their concerns? And ask the reporter if they're asking information. Ask them, what group are they representing? What are they looking for? What do they want to hear? So you want to have your key message, and you want your audience to hear it. So do it at the first opportunity. Do it again. Try to get it out there a couple times to be sure your message sticks. Saying it one time is probably not going to be enough. You need to get the word out a couple times and let people know here. Here's what's going on. Here's what you need to know, or here's what you need to do, or here's what you need not to do. Okay. So more tips. All your material should be very accessible. If you're putting stuff out, putting images out, you're putting stuff out. If you're doing photos, do alt text. A written description of the image that goes along with it. If you can link, and again, the web is so important now, linking information in graphics or PDFs, link stuff back to your website. Make it easier for people to get the information they need from you. And if you have video, add captions and provide transcripts. Make it easier. People don't forget American Sign Language. You have interpreters and live captioning. If you're going to have a news conference, a really good idea to have an American Sign Language person up there. And I did see an unfortunate incident. This was a couple of years ago, and there was someplace, and they had someone signing that didn't actually know how to sign. And people, hearing impaired were calling and say, "What is this idiot doing? That is not correct." So you got to vet somebody. If they're going to be doing ASL, be sure they're fluent in ASL, and they're saying what they're actually translating what you're actually saying to the crowd. You don't want to have that embarrassment. And also just I'm thinking about ASL. Also think about other languages. Not everybody speaks English. There are a lot of in Santa Clara County. I'm not sure how many languages, but there's a lot of languages. So you want to be aware of that. That's one of the things we ran into with Alert SEC is trying to get the word out in various, having people sign up for various languages and get the word out there. But back to press conferences. So a couple things. Think about the questions you're likely to be asked. If something's going on, you probably have some idea what kind of things people are going to ask you. So don't be afraid to ask in advance what questions they're going to ask you, but anticipate what may be coming for you. Don't get blindsided. Don't let them ambush you. Statistics. they sound great, but sparingly, very sparingly. People just don't remember stuff like that. 2 out of 3 dentists, that kind of thing. No, they don't get that. What's really good is telling stories or using examples. If you can relate something, making a point, and relate it to a story that's relatively short, that's a good way. People remember that. Oh yeah, the story about the guy crossing the street and somebody helped him. Something like that. And again, if it's appropriate, be enthusiastic. Let you care about this. You're out there. Now there are times you have to be a little more somber and careful. Hey, I'm happy to report we got 26 people dead. You don't want to do stuff like that. You want to be enthusiastic at the right time. And again, a big part of it, like a lot of things, read the room. Know what the mood is. Is this a cheerful time? Is it a somber time? What is the mood in that room if you go out there and start talking? So that's the good thing to think about. Okay, so think about these. So something happened to your group, to your agency in your city, and you get a question like this: what are your procedures? And people, well, then you should be ready to know our procedures say we do this, do this. And then, were those procedures followed? Of course they were. Our people were, well trained. We practiced this. We followed our procedures. Our source says the CEO was negligent. You wouldn't want to repeat that claim. I don't necessarily want to challenge them on the air about your source, but the CEO showed up, he was on the job, something like that. Do you think this could have been prevented? Yeah, that's a tough question. Yeah, we could have done more, but there's some things you can't prevent. So think about, again, has anything like this happened before? No, we've never had this in our, or it happened last year, and here's what we did to make it better when it happened again this year. So again, that's the kind of, think about some sort of adverse questions you want to think about before you start standing up there. People can be, reporters, that's what they do. That's their job. They want to get information from you. So be prepared for that. Okay, something you never want to say is no comment. No comment is a bad PR, bad PIO. Don't let this. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that right now. The classic, I'll look into that and let you know as soon as possible. Don't never just leave them with nothing. Say, hey, I got to check it out. Let me check it out. I'll get back to you. Let me research that a little bit. You'll find your own best phrase to use, but you want to have a stock phrase that you can throw out there, be ready to go. Hey, I'll look into that. As I said earlier, the regulations are changing quickly in that area. I need to verify and be sure I'm giving you correct information before I put it out. But don't say no comment. That is not a good thing. Okay, another one. Don't answer questions you don't understand. If you're not sure what they're saying, I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you asking blah, blah, blah? Be sure you know what they're saying. Don't let them, spin you around and get caught up in something. If you need to think, hey, that's a good question. Let me think about that. Let me research that. I like research better. Let me check that. Let me research it and I'll get back to you. But don't get on a limb. Don't start supposing, well, I think maybe. You don't want to do that. You have your talking points when you get up, you have your message, stick with your message. It'll be much better though. And I keep stressing this, but don't be afraid to say you don't know. I don't know. Do not give out incorrect or inaccurate information. People will find out. If you say something, 2 + 2 = 5, somebody's going to do that math. Eventually, you're going to get caught. And that's going to destroy your credibility and the credibility of your organization. So you don't want that to happen. So always, tell them, hey, I'll get it. I'll get back to you. But as I said earlier, always follow through. If you say you're going to do something, you have to do it. You have to follow up with people and let them know you'll be getting back to them. Yeah, I said I was going to do this. I'm definitely going to do it. So I will get back to you. Okay. And this is the big one. Generally when you talk about PIO, you tend to think more about TV than most of the other stuff. Radio is cool, print's cool, but TV is where it really, to me, it kind of puts it all together. You're there, you're the face of your organization. How do you deal with that? So how you look is pretty important as well. So a couple things, just your general appearance. Don't wear sunglasses. Even if it's sunny outside, take your sunglasses off because it just looks kind of remote. If you're wearing your sunglasses, you're kind of detached. People like to see your eyes. If you are wearing glasses, it helps. Hopefully you have non-reflective lenses. You don't want to be giving them the mirror look back into the camera, the sun glinting off. So it's good. Good posture. You want to stand up straight, have your shoulders back, be resolute, be there. You want to look good, look confident, and use your hands. We're on a small screen here, but definitely, you're going to use your hands somewhat. You're going to gesture, you're going to point, things like that. That's good. And a big thing, look at the interviewer, not at the camera. Now, unless the interview is, if it's a remote interview, you have to look at the camera, or the interview is behind the camera. So back in the day, early on, when I had events, there was always a reporter and a cameraman. A camera person came out, and they would set up and get their thing going. The last couple of years I worked, they'd gotten rid of the camera guy, and the reporter now came out with a tripod and would, set up the camera and, stand behind the camera or stand right there and be filming. So that, that's more the way it is these days. There's not a full camera crew like there used to be. But again, look at the interviewer, don't look at the camera, don't stare into the camera. And it's easy to say, but you just need to be confident. You need to be sure of yourself. Don't be hesitant, have your facts, be ready to go. And if you feel good, you will look good. That's the way I like to think about it, So again, so you're not going to be able to see. So when you're talking on camera, kind of like talking today, I can see 3 or 4 people on my screen, but I can't see a lot. When you're talking to an audience, you can see everybody's face. When you're on TV, you're talking to one camera. That's all you're seeing. So look right at it, but act like you're talking to a person. You're not talking to 1,000 people. You're talking to one person. And as I said earlier, stories and examples. If you have a really good story or an example you can relate to, throw that in. That makes it easier to. Oh yeah, that kind of reminds me of the time that happened to me. So dress appropriately. As you would for a business meeting. If it's a wildland fire, you're probably not wearing a suit and tie. But if something's happened, you don't want to look sloppy. You don't want to show up in a torn T-shirt, and shorts, that kind of thing. You want to be looking professional as you do to be on TV. And jewelry for the ladies. Well, some guys wear earrings. I don't know, but dangling earrings that can be really distracting. If you have the really big dangly earrings and they're kind of flopping around, it can shine into the camera and it distracts people's attention. So, keep that. And things are very different now. People have many more piercings and stuff than they used to have. So it's not an ironclad rule. It used to be, like a PIO could not have any visible tattoos or piercings or anything like that. So that's probably changed depending on your organization. But you just want to look professional. You don't want to scare people on TV. You don't want to distract them. Okay. And more, empathy is a big thing. You don't want to be a talking head. You want to be able to show people that you care. Acknowledge what people, this is a stressful time. We realize, excuse me, we're all going through a lot here, but here are the 3 simple things you can do to help with this situation. Again, have your talking points, but and do you want to? It's called a survivor-centric approach. Think about, hey, we're all in this together. We've gotten through, whatever the bad thing is going on. So, here's what's going on. But acknowledging it's a stressful time, and I'm here to help you. I'm here to, comfort and give as much information as I can to help the situation get better. And you'll find, I don't know if you noticed, but over the years, if you watch the same TV show, same weekly news, the news every night, you almost feel like you have a relationship with that news anchor. I don't know if anybody else has ever felt that, but oh yeah, Dennis Richmond. Anybody remember Dennis Richmond on Channel 2? Back in the day. Dennis, very confident, broad-shouldered guy, you could trust Dennis Richmond. When he said something, you could believe it. And that's the kind of thing, that's the image you want to foster being a public information officer. When they see you on TV or in the media, oh, I can trust that person. They know what they're talking about. They're not going to lie to me. Okay. Again, a little more crisis communication. Relevant, up-to-date information. You're putting out information, you want to be sure it's good. Simple, easy to understand phrasing. I want you to do 3 things, save some water, turn off your, whatever things you want them to do, get that information right out there. But official, verified information, you want to be sure it provides a clear direction and aligns with your organization's message. Whatever your message might be from your organization, you're there to amplify it and get it out. You want to amplify your message, get it out as many ways as you can, TV, radio, print, social media, get the word out there. But be sure you're putting out the right word. That's the single biggest thing I keep coming back to. I think I've said this already, but plain language, easy. Don't. This is not the time to whip out your thesaurus and demonstrate your extensive vocabulary. Avoid jargon, idioms, and acronyms. Acronyms in particular are death. We're all familiar with ICS and PIO and whatever, but be careful with acronyms. If you do use one, spell it out. Say this means ETA means estimated time of arrival, for example. Not everyone knows that. And again, think about various age groups education levels, and other cultural backgrounds. We have a very diverse community here in the Bay Area, and you want to be aware of that. You're not just talking, the standard group of people. And again, think about people with limited English proficiency. Not everyone is extremely fluent in English, so you might think about that. Tightening your message up a little bit, but keeping it fairly simple and not using too many big words and too many big phrases. You don't want to sound like a dummy, but keep it fairly simple. So cliches, watch out for cliches. Phrases that become meaningless. They just said them over. It's cut and dried. Dry as a bone. Things like that. Be aware of that. And when you're giving, you want to promote actions, specific things people can do. We want you right now to turn off the water supply to your house. We want you to, if you're in this neighborhood, we want you to evacuate immediately to this area. Tell them, what to do and when to do it. That's very specific. And keep it pretty simple. You don't want to overwhelm people. Don't put out too much information at one time. Get it out there. Hey, here's what's going on. Here's what we need you to do. Help us out. We're all in this together. You can build that rapport. I think people can feel that if you're being earnest and you're being honest with them. That goes a long way. And of course, show respect. Be respectful of people and their opinions. Other people can have different opinions. You don't have to argue. You definitely, as a PIO, you don't want to argue with people. You're just stating it. Avoid emotionally charged words. Don't be throwing out accusations. Don't be saying things in particular. And you want to be calm. Don't be too excitable. I talked earlier about being enthusiastic. You want to be enthusiastic, but particularly when you're responding to something negative. If they say something negative and you blow up immediately, that comes across as defensive. So, something more like, well, that's just simply isn't true, blah, blah, blah. Here's the facts on that. So be calm, be collected, cool, calm, and collected. That's a good way to go. So there are a couple tips. So sometimes you want to kind of tag things for people, let them know. So the most important point I want to make is, this point, here's what I want you to do. This issue is critical because, so let them know right up the bunt that this is, hey, here's what's going on. And kind of summarize for that, as I talked earlier about being direct, using direct language, but summarize. So the most important point I want to make is blah, blah, blah. Keep that. So if you get a negative question, isn't it true you guys could have done better? You want to try to bridge to the positive. Answer briefly. Don't do any negative or hot words, but add a positive statement. Things could have gone better, but we're on the scene now. We've got more resources coming, that kind of thing. So find a way to turn it around. Don't repeat that negative. No, we did not. Find a way to turn it around and say something good about what you're doing. So here's an example. Isn't it true librarians allow children to get pornography on the internet? Absolutely not. That a clear no, we're not doing it. Our role is to help children learn to use the internet wisely and help guide them with all the great sites that are out there. So something positive, here's the good job they're doing. Here's what's going on, So, and again, anticipate that question. If there's been a rumor going around in your city, your organization that, the librarians are showing porn to kids in the library, you want to address that and be clear and let them know that's not the case. And here's something positive, something positive coming out of that. So that's an example. And I will tell you, as a PIO, you will get negative questions. There's just no avoiding it. Somebody's going to say some stuff that isn't negative. So at this point, I've been blathering at you guys for quite a while. And Savannah, our expert on social media, much more expert than me, is going to talk a little bit about social media.
Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, so like you talked about, traditional legacy media obviously will always exist, but social media has kind of taken a heavier hand, I guess, in messaging, mostly because it's a two-way street. So you can report your information out to the public in an immediate fashion, and then they can respond in an immediate way. So they can leave reactions and comments to whatever you're trying to say. And that can allow you to sort of tailor your own messaging. So while traditional legacy media is like a one-way street where the media speaks to the public, the social media aspect can create that two-way connection. So you can get direct feedback from the public too. Can move on. There you go. So the comments and questions on social media posts are really important, but sometimes they also require a response. So because it's the public communicating with you, if they have questions, if they have concerns, if they have needs, if they have interests, they're going to say those things on your social media posts. And so usually having a timely response is showing that you're actively engaged, that you're handling the situation, that you're on top of everything, and that you're also willing to engage with them, that you're not just continuing to speak at them, but that you're willing to talk with them and help, figure out a solution to something that they need. So then as your, role in this communication space, you want to make sure that you seem open to constructive criticism, because obviously social media is going to be not so friendly sometimes. And so sometimes people use social media to just, kind of rant, say whatever grievances they have, air their little gripes, things like that. You want to ignore those kinds of things. You don't want to engage and, further go down that rabbit hole. But you do want to pay attention to someone's motives for their comment. So, if they're asking a genuine question, if they have a genuine concern, or if they're in need of something, you definitely want to make sure that you're engaging with them and showing that, again, you're on top of it, you have the situation handled, you care about their needs and their concerns, but you don't need to feel obligated to engage with every single comment. You do, or you should, make sure that you're catching on to some of these trends. So if people are asking similar questions, you want to make sure that you're gathering all of that information, and then maybe you can make, another post, or you can consider a different channel for sharing information. Maybe you can update your website with some FAQs, some frequently asked questions. And, if you're seeing, oh yeah, well, everyone seems to be asking about this, or everyone seems to be concerned about this, maybe you can add that to your, website as a resource for the future. Um, you also have to consider if there's a website or another resource that you can point someone to. So if someone is asking for specific information that maybe you can't provide, maybe you need to direct them to someone who can provide that sort of information. So if they need like another source, you can share a link, or you can share some contact information, and just kind of make sure that everyone, again, still feels like they're heard, and that you're on top of all of these things, and maybe that requires you directing them to someone else who can better provide that assistance for them. Then I think that you should also consider your strategy in your response. So if there's misinformation out there, you definitely want to correct it with accurate information. Like Lynn said, you definitely don't want to continue to repeat negative information or misinformation, and you want to make sure to correct it immediately, and then, investigate or refute any sort of rumors that are going on in the future. Like I said before, you can identify common themes to address in the future. So, if you make some kind of post that says something, and someone gets the wrong idea from your post, and then they continue to spread that online, maybe you address that in your, next post. Maybe instead of saying, oh yeah, we're on top of it, when you actually can't be on top of it, they should be directed to someone else. Maybe you make sure that you say, oh, if you need something, direct them to that person. Um, and so some like do's and don'ts for a social media response. We want to make sure that you do only use authorized representatives to manage your platform and to create those posts and actually publish that messaging. Don't tag any sort of personal social media accounts of organization employees, or to official organization accounts without their permission. Do Again, like Lynn already talked about earlier, continue to write in plain language, and make sure that you're using it tailored to the platform that you're sharing it on. Some platforms prioritize images, some prioritize text, some have clickable links, some do not. Whatever the social media platform is, make sure that you're tailoring your message to that and using it in plain English. Say that you're writing your caption or creating your post, make sure that you use we words to refer to the organization, and you words to refer to the audience who is reading your social media post. Don't just copy and paste like press releases or media releases into social media posts. Make sure that you're kind of, again, tailoring it to that specific platform. And don't survey the public without securing the approval for questions and information requests. Do go ahead and summarize information found on social media. If you're seeing some things that are, again, like trends or things like that, go ahead and summarize that information, but don't copy and paste the social media content. You don't know if that's accurate. You don't know if that's indicative of the situation, so just don't copy and paste it. Do include a date and timestamp on all your reports, and don't include the username and profile picture to protect that social media user in your report. Do go ahead and provide supporting evidence for your statements, link to the original content, or, we had kind of talked about directing people to a website. Also provide context and analysis for the information that's included. Someone might just be seeing your post for the very first time. Maybe they didn't visit your page. Maybe they don't even know that you exist until this very post. So you want to make sure that you're providing the accurate and necessary context for whatever you're trying to say. Don't use a laundry list format. Make sure that, you have the context and the analysis, but you don't have to list, all of the individual posts that are applicable there. For gaining followers, attracting followers on social media is definitely a long-term endeavor. There are actually part of the algorithms out there say that you can't, or they punish you if you are getting a lot of followers too frequently, or if you are following accounts too frequently. They kind of put you in jail because they think that you're, a robot account or something. So while there's no surefire approach, there's definitely some trends and things. And mostly it comes down to commitment and consistency, really. And so some best practices include like tailoring every post to the audience and to the platform. Like I said, some prioritize pictures, some prioritize text. So make sure that your, post is right for whatever platform you're posting it on. Focus on the valuable information and avoid self-promotional content. Collaborate with other organizations, stakeholders, and partners to amplify your message. So you can like tag them in your posts. There's a collaborative feature on some social media platforms. You can go ahead and use that. And then accompany your content with appropriate and compelling graphics, videos, animations, photos. Make sure that people, when they're in the endless scroll, that they want to view your thing, that they want to continue reading, that they actually understand and want to listen to your message. Okay, so some common things to avoid. Avoid spending money on advertising or boosting your post just to gain some followers. It's just not gonna work. It's just not gonna help your messaging. And you should definitely be judicious in paying for exposure on social media. Make sure that all of those connections and relationships are what you want, and not something sneaky going on behind the scenes. I think that you should definitely avoid asking people to follow your account. Users definitely see this as inauthentic, and it seems like you're kind of just grabbing for followers, which, you definitely need the followers so that you have an audience, so that people will listen to your message. But if you're just asking people to follow your account, then they think that maybe you're just trying to grab at followers for a different reason or something. And that's usually not the case. All right, so in the public, excuse me. Excuse me. For the public information scenario here, Lynn, do you want to
Oh,
go
yeah.
ahead and take the
Cool.
lead
Yeah,
on
I'll
this?
talk about this real quick. So yeah, just a couple more, and we won't take a lot. Actually, we're running out of schedule a little bit. So yeah, this is where I'd like you guys to take a shot at just coming up with an initial statement. What would you say? So first scenario, somebody in your organization has done a bad thing and everybody has just learned about it. The financial officer stole half your money, CEO did some, got arrested for DUI, whatever, or something bad has happened to your organization or the community it serves. What would be your initial statement? What kind of thing? So what I'd like to do is give you guys like just a couple minutes and just have a couple of you give me, what's your statement? How would you respond to that when something in your organization is something bad's happened, people just sound out of it? What's your response?
Can I just say, I am
Sure.
not a PIO,
Yeah.
and my first response is, I'm gonna probably hide and find the PIO.
That's definitely That's very good. That's probably the best answer. But what if you're the first person you're the PIO today, right? You get stuck, I mean, well, let me ask the group, the folks out there listening, has anything like this ever happened to your organization or an organization you worked for in the past? Nothing bad's ever happened. You guys have better luck than I do.
So what would you do, Lynn? Tell us
Okay.
what you would do.
Yeah. So bottom line, scenario one, they've done a bad thing. Okay. And everybody's learned about it. So you basically want to come out and admit that it happened. You can't, no, that didn't happen. That's a lie. It's covered. If something did bad happen, let's say that the CFO absconded with the funds, took the money and ran, they're gone. Then you would have to have a calm and measured statement. You'd want to say, here's what we understand has happened. The police are investigating. We've contacted the proper authorities. The police are investigating this and will release more information as it becomes available. Now, you basically want to acknowledge the bad news, get that out of the way, clean up if you can a little bit. We're putting safeguards in place to make sure this doesn't happen again, but we're investigating and we'll get to the bottom of it. Scenario two, you want to be a little more empathetic, where if something has happened that's not your fault, you want to put out to the community, hey, we understand what you're going through at this time. We know the flooding is just devastated, so here's some resources for you. Find some way to help a little bit in the second scenario. How can you direct people to something that's make things a little bit better? Here's where there's a shelter. Here's where we can get assistance, something like that. But you want to have a very careful, well thought out statement to make, but you have to have a statement. You can't just let, hey, if we ignore it, it's going to go away. It's not, because you hear that all the time. We reached out to XYZ and they did not respond. You don't want to be in that category. You want to have a response for them and really just try to cover yourself as best. I mean, I said, you can spin, you cannot lie, but you can spin a little bit. You can say, we're looking at this, we're investigating this, and we'll release more information as it becomes available. That's kind of the bottom line. So IPO is really responsible for proactively engaging with the public, the media, and other organizations. And everybody has incident-related information needs. And your job as a PIO is to get that information out there in a clear, cogent way that reaches as many people as possible in as short a time frame as you possibly can. And the PIO you're going to gather, verify, coordinate, disseminate accurate, that's the key word, accurate, accessible, and timely information for incidents. And your organization management always has to approve the release of information. They brought it really funny, but think about what you're doing. Think about what you're saying, because if it goes out, if it's on the air, you can't take it back. And as anybody knows, if it's ever on the internet, it never, ever goes away. Never, ever. It'll be there forever. So think about what you're saying and be very careful when you say it, but say it with confidence. That's the ticket. And so incident command system, back to first half. Again, we have common terminology. It helps with effective communication and shared understanding of what's going on. We have good effective communication among team members. Big thing, a well-defined management structure, a good chain of command. How to get people knowing what their job is, who's in charge, what are they responsible for, and accountability. Accountability is the big thing. If I've assigned a task, I know who's responsible for that task, or what section or team or unit, and you can track and follow up on it. So it's a really good system. And again, you've used it in your life without thinking about it. And I would encourage you, you might have thought I was kidding earlier. Please take a few minutes, if not today, then tomorrow. Sit down and just draw a quick org chart of your organization and see how it fits under ICS. And then draw another one. How would your organization look, excuse me, under an emergency setting? If you're in an emergency setting, what's your chain look like at that point? So that's the incident command system and PIO. I think that's, yeah. So here are a couple of resources for you. The FEMA, the Emergency Management Institute, all their stuff is online, EMI, look them up. They have a couple public information officer programs. 29 is a public information officer awareness course, kind of like what we just did, but more in depth. And then again, the California Specialized Training Institute has crisis communications and the media, or my mentor, he used to call it swimming with sharks. When you're swimming with sharks, here's what you need to know. So it's a good thing. And there are other resources on the web, if you learn, particularly at FEMA and some other private stuff. There's a lot of good stuff out there on how to be a good PIO. but a lot of it just takes practice. So check it out. I encourage you to do it. And any questions that we can answer for you today? So I hope we've done a good job of explaining incident command. And again, we're not going to make you an expert PIO by attending this session, but I hope what we've done is raise some awareness of the role and responsibilities of PIO and how important it is, and steps you can take now to move ahead and be sure your organization is better prepared for when something does happen in the future. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.